Well, I'm trying to do some repair work on this Vox AC30, and I've run into a little bit of a problem at the first hurdle. On the CC2, the Custom Classics, you've got these little mini toggle switches on the top panel. Now, for whatever reason, they're actually connected to they're soldered to the PCB, these mini toggles, but they come through and are attached to the top panel with a normal nut and also a decorative bezel. Now on the first three, not a problem, the decorative bezel came off easy. But on this one, the whole switch body, and if I move over to the next one that's removed, it's easier to see. If I can point to it, the whole switch body here, the threaded part of the switch is turning. So I don't know how that's happened. I don't know what the switches actually look like underneath yet because I can't get the board out. But on this one, the whole switch body is turning. So when I'm trying to take the decorative bezel off, it won't come loose because the whole switch is turning. Now I've tried to jam things in to keep the threaded part in one place while I'm trying to do the bezel, but it's not working. I've even tried soldering the mini toggle actuator into one position so that I can use some vice grips on here and hold the switch steady while I try and do the bezel, but it's not working. So I think the next stage is, if I just move those out of the way, I think the next stage is going to be to actually unsolder the switch from here. Use a solder sucker to get all the solder off, and hopefully once those terminals are free from the PCB, in theory I should be able to pull the board out and leave that switch in place. Then after that I can see what's going off underneath and hopefully try and remove it. I don't really want to go all out on this bezel. You can see it's pretty scratched up now as it is. I'm not bothered about that. I can buy a new mini toggle and bezel, but I don't really want to scratch up the top panel. I've made a little scratch here already. In hindsight, I should have put some tape around it, but I never expected it to cause so many problems. But it's only an amplifier. It's not the end of the world if there's a few scratches on it. One other thing that's going to be checked is, once everything's back together, I'm going to be checking the biasing. So even though this is a cathode biased amplifier, the tubes are running extremely hot. Now I know that AC30s as a rule do run quite hot, but it seems to be only one pair of EL80 that's running hot. I don't know if these are the ones. These are the cool running ones, I think. If the camera will focus. No, this is one of the hot ones. You see how the silk screening is turning to powder and coming off. Now these two tubes were red plating. These two here. But these two are okay. Obviously I'm going to bang in a new set of tubes, valves as we call them over here in the UK, and then check all the voltages and current draws out and make sure that the biasing is where it needs to be at. This is, with it being the Custom Classic 2, you've got the hot and warm bias setting on the back panel here. I always run it in hot because that's the same as what the TBX's cathode biasing is set to, 50 ohms. That's got a 50 ohm cathode biasing resistor in it. This one gives you the option to do an 82 ohms or 50 ohms. And I'm going to just check everything out. Get a little bit more clean headroom with the hot setting. Anyway, I shall update once I've got this out or not. Well, half an hour of faffing around and I've got the pot board out. I ended up doing what I said I was going to do in the last video. So it's actually switch 4. I desoldered it from underneath and then pulled the board out and the switch stayed in place. So now I've got access to try and remove that switch. I also had to loosen off the preamp board so I could pull the pot board down far enough. While I'm in here, I'll check the solder around the preamp tube sockets. Looking briefly at it, it looks okay, to be honest. Can't take this board out all the way without desoldering those wires you can see there, which come through the board here. I don't need to take that board out, to be honest. I've already done the resistor mod on R6 and R7 to 220 kilo ohms instead of the factory 100k, as recommended by Lyle Caldwell. So for me, at least today, that's mission accomplished. Finally finished going over this CC2 AC30. Changed one of the cathode resistors. You've got two cathode resistors in this amp because of this switch on the back here for the output bias, warm and hot, 82 ohms and 50 ohms. Now if you look at the schematic for this amplifier, which is available on the internet from Korg, Vox, the standard values and the voltages that they quote in the schematic lead to a ridiculously hot output bias, regardless of what setting you have that switch in. So for example, this one in the hot setting, which I always run it on because 50 ohms is the same kind of, well, it is the same cathode resistance as what's in the TVX here. That was giving me a dissipation per output valve of 17 watts, which is just ridiculous for an EL84. I mean, the book says there should be no more than 12 watts max dissipation, but as we know, you get the Vox magic if you run them over 12 watts. But I like to sort of set the bias between 13 and 14 watts per output valve, not 17. No wonder it was eating valves and red plating. As the tube valve degraded that old set of JJs that was in it, electro harmonics that was in it, that kind of wattage just became too much for them. So there's nothing actually wrong with the amp when I tested everything out in the end. So what I've done, this is originally, see if I can find it, bear with me. Yep, here it is. Originally, that's a 5 watt 150 ohm resistor in that location there, and that one is an 82 ohm 10 watt resistor. So for the hot bias setting, that switch just puts these two resistors in parallel with each other. So with 82 and 150, you get a figure that's close to 50 ohms. It was actually 54 ohms on this amp because obviously the tolerance of the resistors. That one is an 82 ohm, but it actually is reading 84.8 ohms. This is now 200 ohm, and it's a plus minus 1% and a resistor, and it's actually reading 200.1 ohms. So the resistance reading I'm getting is just a tad under 60 ohms when that switch is now in the hot setting. So that's lowered the wattage or the bias per valve down to between 13 and 14 watts. It's 13.8 watts. That's when you subtract the screen current and then work out the power per output valve. So it's running just about where I want it. I also changed the screen grid resistors to some Vichy Pro 2s, 2 watts. The factory calls for 100 ohm half watt resistors. 100 ohm screen grid resistors are just nowhere near up to the job, especially when you run the amps flat out like I do for the Brian May kind of stuff, with a normal channel volume right up, the master volume right up, and using an attenuator. 100 ohm screen grid resistors is just inadequate. So they've been beefed up, and that'll help the amp run a little cooler as well, because the screen grid isn't going to get white hot almost to the point of melting. New choke, see the new choke wires here. On the preamp board, I don't usually like using Mallory's, they're okay, but I just put some Mallory capacitors in the signal path. Reason being, it was locked down and the only place I could get the values that I needed was selling Mallory 150s. I normally like to use Vichy. As I say, this board was done many weeks ago, so they've been done. Also done some mods to the pot board, which you can't see from beneath. Basically, along the lines of the Lyle Coldwell mods on there, but because I don't use the top boost channel, I've not done any mods on that one. I also have removed the bright cap. That switch is now not doing anything because I don't use the bright cap ever. So I've made that channel identical to the normal channel circuit in a TVX. So in theory, these 2 amps now should sound pretty close to each other. Power transformer is fine, output transformer is fine, absolutely nothing wrong with the stock ones. I mean, yeah, if you want to go and spend a few £100 upgrading to mercury magnetics or something like that, you ain't going to hear the difference. It's all smoke and mirrors, really. Not for that kind of money anyway. There may be a slight difference, but you're paying loads of money just for a difference that nobody apart from you maybe is going to see, or hear, I should say. So that's about it, really. That's all I've done. Hopefully it should make it a little bit more reliable. Oh, and I've finished it up with, I've just knocked one of my knobs off. Never mind. A set of Sovtech EL84s. I've just gone in, turn it round. Brand new matched quad of Sovtechs. They don't seem to get a good reputation these days, but I've always found them very good. And they sound great. So, hey, they're in bargain basement price, so why the hell not, eh? I think that's about it. This amp's ready for going back together into its cab. And then we can get back to some playing. I have played through it already in this state. I just plugged in the attenuator, power lead, and plugged the guitar in. Got it all nice and hot. Let it idle for an hour after that, and then just checked all my bias again and all the voltages. Everything seems really good.